The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Marcus Aurelius. All right. You're hearing me now? I think I've clicked everything that I can possibly click. We get it? Do we get it back? Hello? From the audience. Can anybody hear me? No, maybe. Yes. I don't know. Think we're back. I think we're getting some sound. No? Nope. Is there a delay? Looks like. All right. Well, give it just a few seconds. Mhm. Hello? Testing, testing. What do? Nope. Think I think there's sound. Sound is good. Okay. Okay. The sound is good. I do not know what happened there. So, but I'm getting the feedback that there is now sound. So we will continue on with the show. Give me a second. Let me move a couple windows, and we will get right back into it. Okay. Goodness. I don't know what happened there. I have no idea what was going on. But anyway, today we're gonna talk. We're now in. I'm all fumbled now. Like I hate when technology doesn't work right and it becomes, like distracting. And then now I'm like kind of off my game. But all right, let's get back into it. Today we are in the second episode of my series on what I consider to be the three pillars of libertarianism. That is self ownership, the non aggression principle, and freedom of association. So, in a few moments, we will discuss the non aggression principle and we'll dive right into that. Uh, First, let me go over what I went over yesterday. So, if you watched the show yesterday, what begins is going to be what you heard for the most part yesterday. I'm going to go through my same notes and I'm going to talk about it because I want each one of these three episodes to have a similar introduction so that if you listen to them out of order, then it still makes sense. Or if you just listen to only one of them, the whole thing makes sense. So, way back in episodes 42 to 47, I discussed self ownership, the non aggression principle, and freedom of association. Again, what I see as the three pillars of libertarianism. These fundamentals, in my opinion, need to be revisited regularly. Why? Like in sales, people need to hear it repeatedly. These ideas aren't widespread. And the way to change that is to talk about them again and again, repeatedly. Another reason to talk about them, to revisit them, is to keep it fresh. Let's include the current topic of the day when we discuss these particular items. In my view, you should be able to take any one of these ideas as is appropriate and interject them into a conversation on anything that is happening at the current time. And the reason I say that is because when you understand the ideas that well, then you can help people understand why it is that libertarians take the positions that they do. Now, another reason to revisit these regularly, especially for podcasters such as myself, is to improve our own communication of ideas. So if you are constantly talking about these ideas and you constantly bring the conversation back to one of these three or whichever ones are most applicable in a particular event, you will improve your own communication. And so I want to improve my communication. The last time I talked about these was in episodes like 42, right? Like going back that far. That's 400 episodes ago. So ideally, I should be better at talking about them today than I was 400 episodes ago. In fact, let me give you a quick story. So my wife my wife and I would attend Toastmasters on a weekly basis for several years. And she is all in on real estate. Like when she comes, when she wakes up, she's checking out real estate and she basically does real estate like roughly 9 to 9 is my joke. I like you work 9 to 9 doing real estate, and she talked about real estate all the time. If you were to throw a question at me about real estate, chances are she would have an answer for you. If she doesn't have an answer, she has a list of people or resources that she could direct you to and say, "Okay, well, I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but here's where you're going to go and get that answer." So one time when she was at Toastmasters, she decided to do a prepared speech about something completely unrelated to real estate. And she remarked after the fact how difficult it was to get up there and talk. Now, she prepared, but when she got up to actually talk in front of people about a topic that she's not used to talking about, she actually found that it was kind of difficult. And that's because she knows real estate. She talks real estate all the time. And so, therefore, at any given moment, she's ready to talk about real estate. And so if you're not talking about, these 3 fundamentals consistently, then you might find that there are some situations or some stories where you could talk about it and you do very well. And then you might find that some other ones you're like, well, you're not as good. And so by doing this regularly, you get practice at talking about these 3 principles with different concepts, or not sorry, concepts, but with different issues of the day, with different incidents. When people say, "Well, how does the non-aggression principle apply in this situation?" And then if you've been talking about it in different situations, you are prepared. And then there's a bonus for people like me who have a podcast and are putting this down, either in a recorded, format, or maybe people who are writers and who have written about it. The bonus is that hopefully as you go along, the medium that you're using, you get better at using. So therefore, my audio, my video is better today at episode 448 than it was in episode 42. So 400 episodes later, I've just got a better appearance, a better sound, and it's all like I could point you back to the days of old when the audio and the video wasn't so good, or I could just update, right? Kind of like remastered version, kind of in a sense. So this series is, and I want to lay an expectation. This series is not intended to be bulletproof philosophy. So if you're like, "Hey, DL, I heard you talking about this, and yeah, you're mostly right, but here's this technical blah blah blah," I probably don't care. Now, and when I say that, I don't mean it in a negative sense. I just mean like I am trying to make this simple and understandable to the everyday average person. That's my goal. So if you're somebody who has never read a libertarian book, if you're somebody that probably doesn't even understand what does it mean to be a libertarian, well then this series is for you. But if you are a libertarian, then the series is for you in a different way. And that is to hopefully show you, one, demonstrate that yes, we should repeatedly talk about these things, but then also give you different ways to talk about it. And so maybe there's something that you didn't think of and you're like, oh, wow, that's a really good way to explain that. Right. And so, like, this is just kind of like me being an example to my libertarian peers. And then also at the same time, presenting ideas to the wider world. And what I want people to do, like the takeaway for people that are listening in who are not libertarians, is I want to teach them how to think about issues of the day, social ills differently. If you don't give people a different way to think about things, then you really can't expect them to come to different conclusions. So let me give you a story. And again, said this all yesterday. So if you heard it, I apologize, but I appreciate you listening in, and then we'll get to the non-aggression principle here in just a moment. So yesterday, and then tomorrow when I'm on on the next show, I'll tell the same story. When I was at Burger King, when I was at Burger King as a kid working, there was a manager that came along, a new manager, and he didn't like the way that I would close the restaurant. And what the situation was, I was very good at closing restaurant. I had, above and beyond the standard things that, were out of the book. I had come up with other things that we could do, which would allow us, once we closed at, I believe, at 11 p.m., we could get the rest of the closing done within like an hour and get out of there because we were young and we wanted to maybe go out and hang out with our friends, or maybe go home and play some video games, or just go to bed, whatever the case, right? But we didn't, even though we got paid by the hour, because we were younger, we didn't really want to stay there all night long. And so I had come up with this series of things that we could do. So like at 10 o'clock, we would do some things. Maybe at 10:15 or 10:30, we would do some other things and just kind of continuing on with little bits of prep. And then by 11 o'clock, bam, we could just knock it all out, get the heck out of there. So we had this new manager come in and he saw that and he decided, you know what, DL, I don't really like what you're doing. And he was like, I don't like this process that you've got. And I was like, okay, well, let me know what you want me to do and I'll do it. And he never did. In fact, I had actually even specifically asked him a couple of times. I said, before you leave tonight, when he was like just getting in and kind of like wasn't there on the regular. So I was like, hey, this is going to be your new manager, and he's going to be stopping in over the next few weeks until he moves and all that good stuff. Right. So like he would stop in and I would be like, hey man, before you leave, can you show me what you would like me to do? And he never did it. Had to clear my throat several times here. And so then one day he was like, he started getting to the point where he was scolding me in a sense. And so he asked me one day, he was like, well, DL, you're not doing it a different way. What's going on? I'm like, well, you haven't showed me. And he's like, okay, well, and so there were two separate incidents where one, he was like, kept promising to show me and he never did. And then another one where he was just sure that his way, whatever that way was that I didn't know about, that his way was better. And so he kind of offered, he said, well, we'll do it your way for now. And then we'll do it my way one of these days. And then we'll compare and see who's faster. And I was like, that's fine. Like, whatever. Still show me what you want me to do. And he didn't do that. And so he comes in one day and he's like, DL, why are you still doing this? I told you I didn't like this. And I'm like, yeah, but so on two separate occasions, one, I was like, well, number one, you haven't shown me what you want me to do. And then on a separate occasion, when he said a similar thing, I was like, well, you told me that we would do it this way and then we would do it your way and you would show me and then we would compare notes. And he's like, oh, I said that. And I'm like, yes, you said that. Now look, let me tell you something. My wife will tell you this. If I remember what you say and you don't, you are in a bad position, okay? Because I am not good at my wife will tell you. So she's like, she will tell me something and go into the other room and come back and I'll have forgotten already. Like total, like yeah, I'm a goldfish when it comes to, remembering what I say and what other people say. I'm not very good at. I usually remember the context of what was said, but not necessarily the exact words. So, so I remembered like that he said we would compare notes. We would basically do a close off, I guess. I don't really know. And so I was starting to get very, very frustrated because like he kept getting mad at me for doing things the only way that I knew how to do. There was no other, like nobody else was showing me anything different. And I specifically had asked him. And so if you want people to get to a different conclusion, to a different end point, don't expect them to do it all by themselves, just by like, "Yeah, you gotta think differently. You gotta come to my conclusion." No, you've gotta walk them through it. I ended up leaving that job, by the way, because, I got time for people's nonsense. So, when you understand these concepts, when people start thinking about the world around them differently, then they can take even complex issues, which we're going to get into one today, and we can relate them to these concepts and we can even bring it back to a single individual. So if you did not hear episode 447, which was yesterday's episode, if you did not hear that, go back and listen. That's where I talk about self-ownership. And under self-ownership, in my opinion, that is the absolute foundation to libertarianism. If you really want to understand why libertarians are the way they are, why they're so hard-nosed about positions that they take, and they're always talking about the individual, it's because we start with this idea that you own yourself. And I talked all about that yesterday. Go check out episode 447. That will give you that foundation. Now, when I say three pillars, you might be thinking like three legs on a chair and that they're all equal. That's not really the case. This is why I say it's not like a bulletproof philosophy. I do think that the non-aggression principle, and then tomorrow when I talk about the third one, which is freedom of association. When I talk about that, those two, the non-aggression principle and freedom of association, I believe actually stem from self ownership. But I think that they're distinct enough that I can talk about all three of them as individual pillars. So again, don't think of this as all pillars or legs of a table, or something like that, legs of a chair, all being equal. Self-ownership does come first, the other two sprout from there. But they are distinct enough, and I think that when you understand these three concepts, that then you can basically talk about any topic, and as long as you understand the details of that topic, then you can apply these principles accordingly. So that's the introductory remarks regarding these three pillars, and I will again go over it tomorrow. So hopefully, you guys stick with me there. So let's take a look at some comments here, and then we'll take a little intermission real quick, and then we will get into the non-aggression principle, and we'll get the details going. So let's see what we've got for comments here. So go ahead and bring those up on the screen here, and then let's see what we've got. So I can let's see. So we got past all the sound stuff, so I apologize, folks. I don't know what was going on, and then I probably had that weird where, like, I froze and all that good stuff, and that was me unplugging stuff. But it looks like we've got it all figured out, and hopefully tomorrow all the sound checks they were good this morning. I promise they were good. I checked them and I was like, all right, good. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. So let's see, what do we got here? So we'll get past all the sound comments. That was intense, says that Liberty lady. Yes, it was a little bit intense to have all those problems, because especially for me, because there's only so much that I can do. And I was on the verge of saying, all right, show's canceled for the day. I'll figure it out and upload something later. Let's see. When I came into that Liberty lady says that when I came into that Liberty, that Liberty, when I came into the Liberty space, and we'll pin this up on the screen here. When I came into the Liberty space, I fumbled over my words. Now that I've been saying this for 2 years, my communication is better. This is absolutely how it works. You have to practice, practice, practice. And it sounds kind of silly, but you actually even need to practice these concepts such that you can just, like, say them when you're tired. You could, when, the story is very complex, you can say, all right, let me pick out these details here and show you how how these concepts apply. And so the more that you talk about it, and look, here's what I've been doing since I'm 47 now. I'm sorry, I'm 46. I will be 47 this year. Um, Ever since I had access to the internet, I have been arguing with people online. And I've just been arguing over and over and over, and I've learned over time what arguments don't work, by practicing them and saying, "Okay, this argument is not a good argument." So, for instance, I'll give you a good one that you can use as you're going along. Um, One of the things that I used to do as a young conservative Republican is that I would argue with people about a topic, and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, well, see, Fox News said this," and then people would immediately go, "Yeah, that's Fox News. I'm not listening to that. I'm not watching that. I'm not reading that, whatever." Right. And so I was like, oh, okay. So, like, they would dismiss me just based on the source. And you can make an argument and say, well, it's not appropriate to dismiss somebody based on the source, blah, blah. You can make that argument, but if somebody dismisses you, they've dismissed you. That's it. Like, so you could try to argue them in back away from that position, but now you're like, that's not the original item that you were trying to discuss or debate with them in the first place. So it seems kind of pointless in my opinion. So what I started doing, it's like, all right, well, if I'm arguing with somebody who's more left leaning, then I'll go grab, or the same thing, the same story from the AP News or from CNN or even from MSNBC, because the way I saw is, if this comes from a source that you approve of, well then, I'll use that source, especially if it's basic. I can make the same point. And like, sometimes the stories would be written differently. It depends whether or not it was like, hey, sometimes the AP would write, would put out an article, and then a lot of the other media would just use that same article. And so it's like literally the same exact article written by the same person, right? So sometimes that would happen. And so in that case, all was fine because, like, if Fox News is using the same AP source as is MSNBC, then whatever, it's the same source. But sometimes they would be different, and they would have different details and stuff like that. And so, or the writing would be different. The slant would be different, all that good stuff. And so I learned, like, to help get past that barrier, use a different resource. And that's what this practice gets you. And you'll find things that work well for you as you go along. You might find, like, hey, you were really good at hammering in on, say, definitions. You might remember terms and their specific definitions very, very well. And so then you can use those to your advantage. So that's the other reason why you want to practice, 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 because you learn the little nuances that are good for you that maybe somebody else isn't so good with. And, some people might be good at remembering dates. And so if you're one of those people that can remember dates and history and events and stuff like that, then that can go toward, when you are talking about these topics, and you can start including that in your conversations to your advantage. And, so there's just all these little small things that eventually you learn. It's kind of like what I say, know thyself, right? You got to know who you are and how you can best, apply some of these different ideas and concepts to different topics. So absolutely good. Um, let's see, awkward episode to mention audio improvements. Yeah, I mean it is. Um, and luckily, I cut out the stuff at the very beginning, and I cut out the comments, Joe, for when I put it out into, like, Spotify and iTunes, and so they're not going to hear all the fun stuff. They're just going to hear, like, the end result that's a little bit better. Those who get to watch it live, or those who are watching it live, well, you guys are going to be the ones that hear all the juicy stuff. So there's that. And that's just the nature of streaming live. So I mean, it is what it is, and we just do our best and keep trucking along. Show must go on. Okay, so let's get to my little intermission here, and then we'll get back and the we'll talk about the non-aggression principle. All right, so we'll be right back. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, there. Okay. So we're back. And now we're going to dive into the non aggression principle. This is heavily debated sometimes within the libertarian community. But again, if you're a libertarian, not interested in having a debate necessarily on the finer points of the NAP, I am trying to communicate the simplicity of it to the wider world. And then hopefully you're learning ways that you can communicate this idea to the wider world as well. Now, when it came to self ownership, I did not provide you any specific definition. And the reason for that is because I felt like self ownership is kind of self defining, like you own yourself. So there wasn't really any definition that was necessary, not in the context of libertarianism. Like self ownership is exactly what it says it is. The non aggression principle is not quite that way. And so I have a definition that I like to use that I think is a value add. So let me put that up on the screen, and I'm going to try to move myself a little bit out of the way here. So give me just a second. There we go. And here's my definition. So this is my definition of the non-aggression principle, which says the principle of non-aggression is a concept that asserts aggression is inherently illegitimate. Aggression is defined as the initiation of physical force against persons or property, the threat of such, or fraud upon persons or their property. The non aggression principle does not preclude the use of self defense up to and including lethal. So that's my when I talk about the non aggression principle, that's what I'm talking about. Now, if that sounded like a mouthful, you could make it even more simple and say, this is summarized to mean you do not have the right to use force against somebody else unless it's self-defense. Like that's the simple version of it. But this one here is a little bit longer because it kind of explores a little bit more. We're talking about the initiation of physical force against a person or their property, the threat of it, or fraud upon them or their property. And all these elements are necessary, as is the use of self defense, including up to lethal. Now, what I don't have in here, and we will get into, is proportionality. So let's take a look. Let's think about this from the most simple and easiest example: a home intruder. I'm sleeping. It's 2 in the morning. I hear some noise downstairs. Maybe my dog barks or whatever, but I hear some noise. And I wake up and I go and I check it out and I find that there's somebody in my home. I have the right to defend my home with force up to and including deadly. Right now, when I say I have the right, we're not talking about the law at the moment. We are talking about the principle of non aggression. The principle states that I can defend myself with force, even up to and including deadly. So if you break in my home and I go downstairs and you have a gun in your hand and I have a gun in my hand, um, at this point, from the standpoint of the non aggression principle, I have the right to shoot you. Now, this may vary with state laws as they have differences when it comes to things like castle doctrine, stand your ground, etc. These are nuances in the law, but those are distinct from the non aggression principle. So the law may not match my vision of the non aggression principle. There could be states that say you don't have a right, like you have a duty to retreat, right? I don't believe that you necessarily have a duty to retreat. However, that doesn't mean that it's not a wise decision. There are, because I do believe that just because you have the right to defend yourself doesn't mean it's always the wisest decision. Sometimes it's better just to get the hell out of there, right? For instance, going back to the home intruder, so many people will tell you, most like any good person who understands proper use of self defense will tell you, let's say that you have a, two-story home. And let's say that you and your spouse sleep upstairs in one room and your child or children sleep upstairs also in their own rooms. And so then you hear a noise downstairs. So I would argue and say that you are better off not going downstairs and just simply yelling down the, grabbing your firearm, yelling down the stairs, "Hey, I'm armed. I'm calling the police. Do not come upstairs." So I would argue that it's in your best interest not to go downstairs and confront someone because you don't know if there's one or four people down there. You don't know what kind of advantage they might have. So if there's one person who's trying to steal your TV, then yes, you might be able to get the drop on them. However, it's also possible that you could go downstairs and you could find that one person's grabbing your TV and a second person has quietly positioned themselves to protect their friend while they're stealing your TV. So you literally might just walk into a bullet. Okay. So for me, I look at it, I say, this is, this is how it plays out. And these things get tricky, right? Because there's all these different circumstances. What makes the issue of non-aggression principle more challenging is when we start discussing elements of, like, say, property, fraud, proportionality, right? So property, again, self-ownership. You own yourself, as I talked about yesterday, which means you own the labor that comes from your body. So I used the example of a garden and I said, like, look, if you have a garden and you till it and you know, bring up some vegetables, you can do whatever you want with those vegetables. You could sell them, you could trade them, You could toss them in the trash. You could eat them. You could do whatever you want, right? Because they're yours. They came from your body. The same thing applies to any item in the house, like say my car, my television, my stove, whatever. All of those things are an extension, in a sense, of my body. I own them in the same sense that I own my body because my body was used to acquire them in some way, right? Like maybe I went and I cut somebody's lawn, and in trade for cutting their lawn, they gave me something, right? Maybe they gave me a new microwave or a new TV, or which I know is absurd. Like who like it had to be a pretty big ass lawn to get a TV, but work with me. And so, like, but then also you might go to work and instead of getting an item, you might just get a paycheck. So you go and you provide services for a company and then they give you money. Well, that money is now yours. It came from the labor that your body produced. And so, therefore, when you go and buy a TV with that, well, now that TV is also yours because it was your body that acquired the money that was able to let you acquire trade it for the television. Now, state laws have the nuances with, like, say, castle doctrine. Some of them will say, some of them will put in there and say, you have the right to protect your home and your car. So the castle doctrine applies. Some states do not. Some states might not imply, but apply a duty to retreat. Other states might say, here's stand your ground. Florida has stand your ground. So nothing that I say should mean that you can do what you want and disregard your state laws because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm talking about these principles and how libertarians understand them. And so I might read a story and I might say, well, the law found this to be legitimate. And might turn around and say, but I disagree with the law. I don't think that the law is is holding to this right of self-defense properly. So there are differences. And again, know your state laws. And I would generally say to obey your state laws, or at least know the consequences of breaking the state law. So if you have a state law that says you have a duty to retreat and you choose not to, I might agree with you that you shouldn't have had to retreat. But if you chose not to retreat, don't look back and be like, "Well, DL said no." DL's telling you, follow the laws as best as you can, and when you break them, understand the consequences, because this is not, again, legal advice. And I just wanna make sure that's very clear, because there is an overlap between the non-aggression principle and how I view it and the law. So we just wanna make sure that we're very, very clear about that. And when you're talking to people about this, you might also include this and say, look, I disagree with the law in certain situations. For instance, in England, they're not allowed to have guns. I think this is awful. I disagree with that vehemently. Same thing with Australia. You should be able to have a firearm. In the United States, they say you can't have a fully automatic machine gun unless you go through certain steps. I disagree with that. You should be allowed to. Some people might say, well, you shouldn't be able to have an assault rifle. A pistol is sufficient for you. And I look at it and I say, no, when it comes to self defense, you have the right to defend yourself and you have the right to use whatever tool you wish. So, again, back to my intruder. If somebody is an intruder, I might go downstairs with a knife. Maybe I don't own a firearm. Maybe I don't like guns. I'm MacGyver, right? For you olds, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm more of a MacGyver guy. And so I go downstairs and I don't have a knife or a gun, but I have some contraption that I've built that's going to knock out the intruder. Unwise, in my opinion. And it's a bit of a contrived example. But the point being, it's my house, my body. I have the right to go down and decide how I want to confront this person and with what. I want to walk downstairs with just a baseball bat. Same concept. I have the right, again, under the non aggression principle, to defend myself with whatever weapon or object that I choose. I could just grab a lamp and say, all right, we're going lamp style. Pretty sure that's a term. So now let's talk about fraud and proportionality. Fraud is very simple. I think we all can understand it. It's deception, which causes somebody to make a decision that they might otherwise not make. proportionality is matching this responding aggression to the level of threat. So let's take this home intruder example to a different level. Let's say that you hear a noise in your kitchen. You decide to go and investigate. And we'll disregard whether or not you should be. Let's just say that you are. So you go and you investigate. And in situation one, in scenario one or scenario A, you go down and you see that there's an adult in your a full grown man in your kitchen. So you're going to respond in some way. You might point your firearm, presuming you have one, and say, "Get out or I will shoot." And you might give them an opportunity to retreat. However, let's take scenario B. Let's say you walk in, you hear a noise, and the door closes to your refrigerator, and there's a 9-year-old child or a small child that's eating some food. Maybe they broke in because they were hungry. Well, chances are you're going to respond a little differently. Why? Because the threat is different. If you just start blasting, I think that you are violating this idea of proportionality, because how much of a threat is the child? Now, you can you can massage all you want the details of the scenario, like what if the child's there and there's an adult, to the side. All we're talking about, and we're just using this goofy example to illustrate the difference in proportionality. Another example might be if you're with your girlfriend, like you're a guy, you're with your girlfriend, and she gets mad and she slaps you. Okay. Well, I would argue you don't really need to respond. Like it depends on maybe what happened, right? Like if she was asking you a question and you felt like she was getting on your nerves and you called her a nasty name and then she gets mad at you for saying that to her and then she slaps you, I'm going to look and I'm going to say, there's not really much of a threat there, right? Or if she finds out that you're out with another woman and she's really, really hurt and then she slaps you again, I say, okay, well, proportionality would suggest that at best you push her away, something like that. But you wouldn't have the right to just pull out a gun and shoot her, right? Like that would be over the top. And so when we talk about, your right to respond to threats, there is a response that is over the top, and there are responses where, okay, that's within the realm. But then you can get into situations where, well, these concepts and applying them and trying to make a decision, that comes maybe a little bit more nuanced, and it's not so cut and dry as a goofy example might make it sound, which is how the real world works. So what I want to do is I want to talk about, since we're relating to current topics of the day, I want to talk about the non-aggression principle and how all of these concepts apply with, say, dating and the trans community, because I've seen a lot of things lately regarding this. So let me show you some comments on social media that kind of spurred this conversation. And then we're going to dive into an actual story, a real actual story that happened. That we have details, we have people involved, and we can discuss it. So let me show you some of my comments here, real quick. Not those comments, these ones. So here we go. So this is just a comment that I happened to see on social media. So Sophie Molly, whoever that is, said no trans person should have to reveal their sex assigned at birth. If someone suddenly takes offense during intimate relations, that's their problem, not the trans person's problem. Trans people are not responsible for anybody's internalized homophobia and transphobia. That's what they said. They're like basically like, look, if you meet somebody at a bar and you get home and it's getting hot and heavy, and then you find out that they're a trans person, that this is somebody who appears to look like a woman, but turns out they have the body parts of a man. Well, you know, that's your problem. Don't be a homophobe. Okay. Well, I disagree. And so here's how I responded. I said, safe to say, when the message is, it's none of your business what your genitals touch during sexy time, stop being a phobe, society is in decline. Perhaps people would be less phobic if the trans community preached transparency like society does in other relationship aspects. So think of it this way. Imagine I'm a married man. So imagine I go out to a bar. My wife's out of town. I go out to a bar. I'm hanging out. My kids with grandma. I'm hanging out, and I meet a woman, and we hit it off, and we've got this like spark going on, right? Which, by the way, would never happen. But let's just say that it did, and let's say that she inquired and she said, DL, are you married? And I go, no, I'm not. And she might say, man, how's a great guy like you not end up with a wife by the ripe old age of 47 or 6 or whatever, you know? And I go, I don't know, just been my bad luck. You know, love's hard out there. And so then let's say that we go off and we're going to spend the night together. And then sometime through the course of that event, at some point, she discovers that it turns out I actually am married. Well, like this story, it was her business whether I was married. These details matter. She might have been like, "Wow, this is a great catch. I'm going to have a good night." And it could all be ruined for her, and we might have been in the act of being intimate or somewhere, leading up to that, and I have defrauded her. I have told her something that would have changed. I've told her something that gave her a different impression, that led her to make a different decision than she otherwise would have made. And so therefore, I was fraudulent in that interaction in the same way that a trans person who does not at some point disclose this before you're getting hot and heavy, right? They are defrauding a person. Now, maybe the person just kind of takes it at face value and says, well, you appeared to be a woman, blah, blah, blah. You can make any argument you want, but at the end of the day, we all understand that there are certain expectations that people have. And in some cases, people go out of their way to ensure. There are women out there that may specifically look for a married man. You're terrible people. But there are many women out there that are like, look, I'm game meeting a guy and going home with him. And you can take like whatever moral view you have of that, not relevant to this conversation. But there are women that might say, I'm willing to go home with a guy potentially, but I'm not going to go home with a married man. I find that unacceptable. And I would never want that to happen to me. So I'm not going to do that to other women. And so if they're seeking a marriage and a man does not disclose this information, at any time, then I would say that he is being fraudulent. So let's look at another comment that I made, and then we'll get to an actual real life story here. So, and this is actually the story that we're going to talk about. So, this person, Stacy, says, why are so many trans girls afraid to leave the house? Interesting framing. The story from the Daily News or Daily Mail News is transgender girl was stabbed 9 times at a roller skating party, quote, in revenge for lying about her gender before performing a sex act on a boy, the court hears. And so then I responded and I said, assault and stab someone who isn't an immediate threat off to jail where you can be someone's girlfriend. Deliberately hiding trans status ought be its own crime, like a sober person getting quote unquote consent from a drunk person. People have a right to their bodies on their terms. Remember, this is all about self ownership. I have a right to my body. I have a right to choose who I am becoming intimate with and under what circumstances. So I may say, if I'm a single guy and I go out and I'm trying to find me, a lady to come home with me, um, I have the right with my body to say, I want that person to be unmarried, the same as I have the right to say, I want that person to be relatively sober, right? We might have a drink or two, but maybe I don't want somebody that's super duper drunk, as I do the right to say, I want this person to be a biological woman. I have a right for all of those. And all of them are different, and all of them will have different points at which I can make that decision. For instance, if I go out and I meet a woman and we have a couple of drinks and I know how much she's drank, then I might say, okay, well, she's had 1 or 2 glasses. I believe that she is fully able to make proper consent. Or I might say, hey, I know we drank a lot tonight. Let's withhold this. I'll get your number. We'll call you. We'll meet up again once you're sober. right? Like I could do that. And those are my terms that I would be putting out there. Same thing as if I said, "Hey, are you are you really a chick?" And they might go, yeah, yeah, totally, yeah." Okay. Well, that's no different than if I said, "Are you married?" And they go, "No." Same concept. You're defrauding me because I might make my decision again about my body based on your answer. So now let's look at this story. Now, I didn't use the Daily Mail because, unfortunately, Daily Mail, I would have liked to have used your story, but the problem is you made it very difficult. So let me pull this story up real quick. Oops, I think in the heyday of having all kind of audio issues, I wasn't quite as ready, but I think we're going to be good here. There we go. So all right, there we are. All right, so here's this story from the BBC. Gang attacked over transgender student. I'm sorry, gang detained. I totally read that wrong. Gang detained over transgender student stab attack. All right, let me zoom in on it so you can see it as we're going on. So we're going to read this story and we're going to talk about how non-aggression, the principle of non-aggression applies, how proportionality applies, how level of threat applies, how what was the other one? Self-ownership applies, which was yesterday's topic, and then also fraud. We're going to put fraud in here as well. So, a gang of youths have been detained after they lured a student to a northwest London car park where she was beaten up and stabbed because of her transgender identity. Right off the bat, you're wrong. You lured somebody there. Okay. This means they were not a threat to you. If you have to lure somebody to a location, they're not a threat. Maybe they were a threat a while back, but they're no longer a threat. So you have no right to use aggression of any kind at somebody, on somebody, because you lured them in right off the bat. All right. And this is, by the way, in England, I believe. I believe this, or yeah. So the Old Bailey, I don't know. I don't know. Does anybody know what Old Bailey? I don't know what that is. Somebody will have to look it up. The Old Bailey heard the victim, who was aged 18 at the time, had been under the impression she was attending a roller disco with friends at Harrow Leisure Center on 10 February last year. So the luring here was like, "Hey, friend." So now we've got two instances of fraud. One, you're pretending to be somebody's friend. Number two, you are inviting them to an event under like, "Hey, why don't you come and hang out? We're all going to go roller skating." Okay. Prosecutors said she was attacked during a 45-second pre planned assault as revenge for performing a sex act on one of the teenagers who had not realized she was transgender. So now we're starting to talk about this fraud. Like, "Hey, we got intimate. You didn't tell me that you were a transgender person." We'll get more into this as the details unfold here. Sentencing the group on Thursday, Judge Philip Katz said the ambush was vicious and had elements of transphobia and revenge. The really cool thing here about the non aggression principle, about self ownership, is that you can literally discard all the phobias, all the or all the isms, sexism, racism, transphobia, xenophobia, all those words don't matter. Not when, because we can apply all of these accordingly and deliver justice without them. They don't matter. That's one of the things I love about the libertarian ideology is that we don't need them because we've got it all covered. Now, the revenge is a little different because revenge does apply to, were they a direct threat? If you're getting revenge, the person is not a direct threat. They are not a threat in that moment of any kind. And remember earlier, I said, depending on the level of threat, depends on how you might respond. If you have a girlfriend that gets mad at you for calling her a nasty name and she slaps you, at best, push her away. If your girlfriend's mad at you because you got home late and she tries to come at you with a knife, then things are a little different. Now you can use a little bit more force in defending yourself, right? So, like, proportionality matters. But when you're talking about revenge, you're number one, you're violating the idea of proportionality because there's no threat. So there's no proportion to have, right? And then also you're violating the issue of the of having a direct threat in order to defend yourself. All right. Let's see here. We'll skip past some of these parts, some of the unnecessary details. Judge Katz sentenced Betsy Ramsey, who boasted on Snapchat about stabbing the victim, to 8.5 years at a young offender institution. So now they went and boasted about it. That just is stupid, right? Like if you commit a crime, you probably shouldn't you shouldn't document it somewhere. But the documentation of it is no violation. That just gives us the evidence that you violated all these other principles. So point that out there. Harris, Hines, and Osei were each told to serve 3 years in detention for their roles. The 17-year-old boy was given a youth rehabilitation order, a 3-month curfew, and told not to enter Harrow or contact any of the other defendants. Okay. Um, 17-year-old girl, a 17-year-old girl who was 16 at the time, admitted stealing the victim's handbag during the attack and given a supervision order for 12 months, having spent a year in custody. Okay, so you stole their bag. Now you stole their property on top of it. Now, in the context of a vicious attack like this, the stealing of the handbag is kind of on the minor side in the context of. However, it is still punishable because you had no right to steal their stuff. Even if somebody, like, let's say I'm walking down the street and somebody comes up and they pull out a switchblade and they're like, "Give me your wallet." That's how old I am talking about switchblades. They say, "Give me your wallet." And then I pull out my big, huge knife and I'm like, "That's not a knife. This is a knife." Tell me if you know the reference. Yeah. And then, uh, I say, "Now you give me your wallet." Well, I can't do that. I can pull out a bigger knife and I can say, "Hey, you better get out of here because I'm better armed than you." But that doesn't give me the right to steal their property. So stealing property at any time is always wrong. All right. So yes, totally agree with this person going to jail for stealing property. Let's see here. Let's skip down here a little bit. We don't want to read everything, and I didn't highlight the parts that I really wanted. All right. So here's where it gets a little dicey. Having been attacked in the past because of her transgender identity, she denied it. Okay. So let me back up a little bit. Ms. Here said Harris invited the victim to his home on 29 January, and while in his bedroom, she recalled Harris being on the phone to a friend who said she was transgender. So you have two people. They're in the house. They're getting ready to be intimate. I don't know why that one person is on the phone with their friend. I guess that's how things go these days. Not really terribly relevant, but they're on the phone with their friend, and their friend's like, "Dude, you know you're with a transgender person, right?" And so then the person denied it. Like, "Yo, are you trans?" My friend said, "You trans," and they're like, "No." Okay, that's fraud. You were directly asked. And I think elsewhere in this story or one of the other news articles that I read indicated that the person who was not transgender had asked the person who was transgender if they're transgender. They denied it. I think they also pulled out a knife and said, "Tell me the truth." And then they denied it. That makes it even more difficult because now if you're under threat, now it's like, okay, well, are you defrauding this person? Yes, you are. However, the circumstances make it a little bit more tricky to work out. But we're just going to go with the simplicity of it. Unbeknown to the victim, footage of the sex act was recorded and then shared on Snapchat. Okay, you did not get permission. So let's, here's where we are with this story. Two people are being intimate. They've gotten past whether or not the other person was transgender. Okay, they're being intimate. If you need to know the details of what the intimacy was, go read the stories. You'll find out. So now they're being intimate, and one person is recording it. Well, in the same way that you have the right to your body and to use it, you have the right to be recorded or not. You have the right to say, "I don't wish to be recorded." And they were not asked this. So that is also a problem. And I would consider that to be a violation of their property, which is their body, because they might say, "Look, I'm willing to be intimate with you, but not on film, because I don't want this intimacy going out to the wider world." Doesn't matter whether they're transgender or not, they have a right to their body and to not have their body shown. And in fact, if you're on the up and up with some of the drama lately, the YouTuber Destiny is right now under heavy fire for doing this very thing, for recording intimate acts with other people and then sending it out without permission, right? That is a violation. So don't do it. All right, moving on. Another friend then contacted Harris to say the victim was transgender and he threatened to stab her if she lied. Now, when you threaten to stab somebody and say, "Hey, look, are you transgender?" and they go, "No." Now they might be defrauding you, but and if it's just a simple ask, "No, I'm not," I'm gonna say you're guilty of defrauding this person because they're making a decision based on your answer. Do I want to engage with you? However, if you pull out a knife and say, "Tell me the truth," well, now you are threatening this person. This story is wild because it just like there's so many twists and turns when we're talking about the non-aggression principle. So now this person's like got a knife and they're like, "Hey, you better tell me the truth." And they go, "No, I'm not." Now at this point, I'm relieving this person of defrauding because now they're under threat. They they're now the continuing the lie at this point is now them defending themselves. So the first instance when there was no threat, immediate threat, you are defrauding them. But now when somebody threatens you and demands to know the truth, now you're in self-defense mode. This gets tricky. This is why I say from the very beginning, before you ever enter somebody's home, you should probably disclose all the things that people might want to know. Like, do you have STDs? Are you in a relationship with somebody else? Are you a transgender person? Some of these things matter. If you've had if you've had breast implants, probably it's safe to say that you don't have to worry about that one. So you don't have to disclose every single little detail, but maybe read the room socially and say, okay, what are the things that people are concerned about? Let me make sure I put those cards on the table long before while you're at the bar, you meet somebody and you're at the bar. That's a great opportunity to make those disclosures. Say, by the way, I'm married. By the way, I'm a transgender person. If you're out in public, this will help reduce your threats because once you get into somebody's home, things can go awry very badly for you. And and there is a certain point for which the other person may be wrong, but the only way to deal with it is after the fact. So it's best to not defraud people from the very beginning. All right. So then we go on. She said that in the days that followed, Harris recruited Betts Ramsey to beat up the victim and plotted the attack that the others with others in the Snapchat group. Now, here's what I'm going to say. If you go home with somebody and you ask them, "Hey, are you transgender, by the way?" and they say, "No, I'm not." Okay. Depending on the context, I'm going to say there's no threat there. But if they do say, "Yes, I am," you are still not under threat. At that point, they have basically come clean, if you will. They've been honest with you. And the only option that you have, if you're getting ready to be intimate with some person and you find out that they're somebody that you did not want to be intimate with, your only option at this point is to excuse them and say, "Please leave. Please leave my house. We're done here. This is not what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for a married man or a woman. I wasn't looking for a transgender man or a woman. I wasn't looking for, somebody who has an STD. You've come clean." Okay. They're not a threat, right? Because it's not a threat to say, "I am this person," or "I have this," or "this about me." That in itself is not a threat. So you have no right, even though they're in your house, you have no right to use aggression. You do have the right to say, "Please leave." If they refuse to leave, now we're entering into an entirely different ball game. You might have you probably have a right to defend yourself. Like, "Hey, I've asked you to leave. You're not leaving. Now this is becoming a problem." So you see how these principles can apply to a complex story just like this. So let's continue on. On the day of the attack, Betts, Ramsey, Harris, Osei, Hines, and the 17-year-old boy waited for the victim at the bus stop at a bus stop near to Harrow Leisure Center. Okay, so they're still in this defraud mode, right? They're luring this person. They're like, "Hey, come here. We're gonna have a good old time at the skate rink." Well, that's what we're telling you, but we're going to have a good time, if you will, assaulting you. But they don't know that. When she arrived, she was immediately attacked. Okay. When she arrived, yes, transgender person. Yes, you were intimate. Too bad. That's it's over at this point. You have you have the only recourse you might have is to go to the law and say, "Hey, this person, if the law provides for some sort of sexual assault, right? Because the person turned out not to be who you thought they were, then you might have recourse there. But otherwise, you have no recourse. The event is done and over with. Okay. They are no longer a threat to you. All right. So then it goes on. The assault was filmed. Okay. Again, with documentation. I do enjoy when criminals document because it makes it so much easier to get them. Because I don't like criminals, especially violent ones. And if you're going to be violent, then by all means, document away. That way we are sure to have the evidence to put you away. Do it. Document it. Right? If you're going to be violent, go ahead, document it. I want you to. All right. So the assault was filmed by others from Snapchat group on their mobile phones. These videos were then posted on social media. So now we're, like it's not really applicable to the concepts, but we're dealing with some retards. Footage played to the court showed the victim being floored by several punches thrown by the teenagers who had surrounded her. So again, this person is not a threat to you. You are assaulting them. You are way in the wrong. If the transgender, now this is England, so it doesn't count, but if the transgender person happened to be armed and pulled out a firearm and started blasting all these people, I, in the most simple terms, I would say they were right. Now, like if one of the teens takes off and runs and gets shot in the back, then no, you don't have the right to shoot somebody necessarily that's retreating. But in a simple terms, yes, they would have the right to defend themselves, especially violently, because now they're getting assaulted. They're physically being assaulted. And so here in the US, I would advise if you're somebody who's in any kind of group that's considered to be a minority and you fear for your safety, arm up. Go train at the range, buy you a firearm, and carry. If you live in a state that makes it, cumbersome, then fight to have the laws changed or move or carry what you can. If the best you can do is carry a rock, then carry a rock. Okay? But you have the right to defend yourself against people who assault you. And I don't care who you are. And if you're transgender and people are like, man, this transgender person lied to me and we were intimate and then I didn't find out about it till later. Well, that's too bad. You shouldn't be assaulting people. You assault them, they have the right to shoot you up to that potential point. And again, when I say right, I mean under the libertarian ideology, not necessarily under the law. Please be mindful of the law. Miss here said once the victim was on the ground, Betts Ramsey took out a knife and began stabbing her, while the others continued to kick, punch, stamp, and drag her along the floor. Now, in this particular, I don't know if this is the group. It seems like it. There's some gang members. It's his own problem. Members of the public intervened and called emergency services. The victim was treated by paramedics in the car park and then taken to St. Mary's Hospital while her attackers fled to a nearby tube station. Okay, so here's the deal. Let's assume for a moment that everybody was stabbing this victim and they weren't initially a victim. Let's say the story was different. Let's say that instead what happened was that they said, "Let's go to the skate rink." And then the transgender person thought something was going to break out and then initiated the assault. And then they attacked back. Let's just to say that happened. Stabbing somebody repeatedly like that, while others are kicking and punching. If you started out with any sense of any argument that it was self-defense, there is a point under which it becomes disproportionate. When you're defending yourself, you defend yourself up to the point that the threat is no longer a threat. If there are more of you than that one person, that point comes very quickly. If it's just one on one and the person is laying there, they're immobile, they can't move, right? They can't get up, they've been stabbed a few times, maybe they're bleeding profusely, and you keep stabbing. You are now in disproportion. You're no longer using a proportionate response. And there may be consequences for that, and probably should be consequences. Say, hey, look, you went too far. Right? Now, again, this is situation dependent. So there are a lot of details that would have to go into this to consider it, right? Um, it's like, should you double tap if you're firing at somebody? Maybe, maybe. If my wife, so let me make it a little bit easier to understand. Let's say I'm away on a trip. Let's say my wife is here and she decides to, you know, let's say that it's not the case, but let's say that our son's room is on the other side of the house, and she hears a noise, and so she goes to check on him, and then so she has to go, so she can't just barricade herself on one side of the house and say get out. So she goes and she checks on her son, and she finds that there's an intruder, and she takes a firearm and she shoots him. Now you might say, well, just one bullet is sufficient. Well, here's the case: women, if it's a man. Women tend to be weaker than men physically, typically. What I tell people, I'm 120 pounds and I'm 5'3". So I'm not very big. I'm a scrawny little guy. I can overpower most women that I know physically. Not that I would, but I can because I'm a man. So therefore, if a woman is by herself and in her home and she shoots a guy, and she just unloads the whole magazine, I would argue and say that number one, if the magazine is unloaded in a quick succession, so bam, 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 you just keep pulling the trigger because you're afraid, your adrenaline's running. You see this big, huge, humongous person, that that if they get up, you could be in trouble. So you just unload the whole magazine. And your argument is, I was scared, it was in the moment, and I just unloaded. Then I think that's reasonable. I think that is, I didn't know the level of threat and they were in my house and I was alone and I feared that this person could at some point overpower me. So therefore, I went all out. Totally acceptable, not a violation. But let's say that uh, you shoot somebody, they they get outside the house, they manage to they're crawling in the window. And again, we're disregarding what the law says. They're crawling in the window. They've got a knife in their hand. They're like, I'm going to kill you once I get in here. And you shoot them and they fall back out the window. And then they decide, you know what? This is not worth it. So they start running. And then you go outside and you keep shooting them. You're wrong. You have went beyond just simple self-defense because now this person is no longer a threat. They're actively retreating. So now you are wrong morally because you went after somebody and now you are the threat. So it can get complex. It can get dicey. However, if you understand these concepts well enough, you can start to break down the story. And you can say, all right, let's break it down. In this moment, based on the evidence that we have, we believe that person A was the victim. However, based on the details, as things played out, person A now became the perpetrator. Right? They started out as the victim, but then they took it to the point where now the attacker has become the victim. This is why we don't need things like transphobia and all these other, because we can break this down. And situations are never black and white. A lot of people say, well, there's a lot of gray. Have you ever considered what gray really is? It's just black and white. Like if you zoom in effectively enough, gray is just a bunch of black and white, squares or dots or whatever that when you pan out far enough, it looks gray to you. So you sometimes have to zoom in on the details and say, okay, here's the black part, here's the white part, here's the black part, here's the white part. And when you zoom back out, you say, wow, it looks gray. But if you break it down enough, you can start to work it out. Now, depending, and a lot of it depends on the details that you have, the information that you have available. If you don't have much information, you may not be able to break it down. And so then an investigation has to happen. But ultimately, hopefully you see and you understand how the non-aggression principle is applicable in everyday lives and how we can break it down even when the issue is complex. So I think I had one more thing that I wanted to point out. And this is what I call the paradox of the non-aggression principle. So let me pull this up really quickly up on the screen, and then we'll get to some comments and close out the show for the day. So here's something that I said a long time ago. I said the non-aggression principle paradox. Violence is not an appropriate response to words. So if somebody calls you a nasty term. However, being punched in the face has a humbling effect on how you use words. The same for a gut punch or repeated kicks to the chest. Some of us were slow learners. Some of us being me. Okay. I was a slow learner. So I just want to point out because I know a lot of people will say, like, well, words are violent. No, words are not violence. If I say nasty things to you, if I say mean things to you on the internet, that's not violence, nor is that a threat, right? Saying mean things. Now, if I make a threat, that's a different story. Then we get into the complexity of how serious is this threat. If I say, who's in the chat? If I say Joe Hanoush, who's in the chat, and I say, I'm going to come down to your house and kick your butt. Now, depending on the conversation, maybe we've went back and forth and there might be no reason for Joe to believe that. He might just be like, okay, DL's puffing up his chest and talking a little tough, whatever. But if I've never met Joe and we're online and we're chit-chatting and it gets into an argument, and then I say, "I'm gonna come and kick your butt," and he goes, "Whatever, you don't even know where I live." And then I go, "Yeah, you live at 123 Mulberry Lane over in such and such city, blah 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 blah. And right now, I've been, I know your schedule, so I know where you like if I start listing out details, now all of a sudden that threat now becomes a little bit more serious. Like so again, you have to break these things down. Gray areas are black and white when you have enough detail to get into the nuances. So everything is a matter of how much information that you have available. The more information that you have, the more likely you can make a determination whether or not there's an actual threat that needs to be dealt with. And so I would argue if it's just a simple threat like, dude, I could kick your butt. You're lucky I'm not there right now. Probably don't need to do anything. Ignore the person, block them, mute them, whatever, let it go. But if I start giving details and say, hey, I'm going to come down there tomorrow at 3 o'clock, I know you'll be home because you have the day off, and here's your address. Well, now I think it's appropriate for any person to call the authorities and say, this person is making a threat. I'm concerned for my safety. Right now, you could do that anyway. But the idea being, how do we approach this? How do we apply it in the real world, in real world circumstances? So that was the goal today. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, even though, even though it would be a violation of the NAP for someone to punch you in the mouth for saying something, if they do, it might make you a little bit more wise next time around. Again, that doesn't necessarily make them wrong. It's just a paradox. That's all. All right, let's take a look at some comments, and we'll end the show here. So let's see what we've got. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Do 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 do. Let's see. I'm looking through here. Ba, 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 ba. Yes, that Liberty lady points out. Don't forget to come back to this live stream after the chat feed disappears and leave a comment to make the algorithm dance so that this show shows to more people. So if you want to help me out, come back in a few minutes after the show's over and just be like, hey, DL, here's what I thought of the show. Just give me some final thoughts. That allows other people to see it. It boosts the algorithm, gets more eyeballs and, attention to this show. The algorithm says, oh, people are talking about it. Let's show it to other people. Right. So do me that solid. Let's see. Joe Hanoush says he's picking on me because he knows he can kick my butt after can't lift tent gate. Um, running inside joke, folks. Not really that big of a deal. And whether or not I can kick somebody's butt is not relevant. And to be honest with you, I don't claim to be a badass of any kind. Although I will say this, I will tell people, I always say, look, I don't claim to be a badass, um, but I will at least make you earn it. So anybody that comes at me, I will make you earn it, even if you win. So, you know, I might have to say, you think my face is bad, you should see his fist. Right? They took a beating too. That's so goofy. Okay. All right, so that's my show today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it and found it absolutely informative and inspiring. Let me see here. Where's my okay? Doing this, I might have to change things up here a little bit. So let's get to that closing. And thank you for joining the show. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.